Yeah, we'll give everybody, there we go. Recording's on. We'll give everyone
Okay.
another minute or two just to file in. Yeah. But what was your day like today? What were you doing?
Let's see. I was just doing regular old work all day long. Meetings, Zooms, sending a lot of emails. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. Well, we really appreciate your time, you making time for us and
Yeah.
late in the evening, kind of when work's kind of done. And we appreciate you coming and talking to us. And I know everyone is super excited just to hear about what you have to talk about. It should be good. It should be a really great session. And I just to everyone who's here already, yeah, some of you, I know it's your first time here at one of these alumni interest group roundtables. Thank you so much to the AIG for setting this up and for inviting Erica to come talk to us. Yeah, this is very interactive. We really want your questions to be answered. This is an experience for you all. I'll be asking a lot of questions, and I definitely have a ton that could fill up the whole time, but obviously we really want to open up the conversation to you. I know Erica really wants to hear from you all, and there's some questions that she has for you guys. Definitely for the news side, but I know business people can really chime in and really be a part of this conversation. So yeah, I'm really excited for tonight's session. And yeah, we'll give them one more minute to join on.
So Erica, do you work at home?
No, but I am at home right now. I have 3 kids, so I usually am home and doing kid duties in the evening.
But you still do a lot of Zoom meetings.
Still do, I mean, our center is very industry facing. And so I do a lot of work with folks who are not on campus.
And do you typically use Zoom or do you use other platforms for the?
Yeah, mostly, I mean, Zoom, it depends. Sometimes Zoom, sometimes I'll just talk to people on the phone, old fashioned way. And, occasionally a Teams meet. If it's something on campus, it'll maybe be a Teams meeting.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Teams hates me, so I really don't. I don't. Stay away from them whenever I can.
Understood. Yes. I like how it always tries to make you think it's a Teams meeting, even when it's not.
Oh, Lean is here. Lean, what time is it where you are? Oh, she's not in yet.
Connecting to audio, it says.
I think she's coming to us from Lebanon.
Amman, Jordan is where she lives. That's where I was supposed to be flying last night.
Wow.
But I'm obviously not there.
I know Lean from Flight Desk, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Daily Collegian alum. Oh yeah. Yeah, no, we're super happy to have Lean. Well, cool. We'll go ahead and get started then. Yeah. I'm sure people will be rolling in and some people might have to leave early, and that's totally okay. But welcome everyone to I think it's the 3rd time so far this semester that we've done an AIG roundtable talk. And tonight we have a really excellent guest. I'm really excited we have her today. We've talked to Erica before as a Collegian board, just about different things. Erica's really well known for the work that she's done with the Daily Tar Heel, but first she graduated from UNC in 98, and she's a graduate from their journalism school. And then she went straight to work at the Charlotte Observer, and you worked there for, I believe, about a decade, and you were covering a host of different things, including government. And then she went back to go work for the Daily Tar Heel. You were the news advisor for a period of time, and then it was over a decade with the Daily Tar Heel. You were the news advisor, then the general manager, and now you're you can correct me if I'm wrong about your title, but it's the director for the Center of Innovation and Sustainability in Local Media at the Hussman School of Journalism at North Carolina. Erica, we are so lucky to have you tonight. Thank you so much for coming out.
Well, thank you guys for inviting me. I am excited to talk to y'all and see if there's anything that I can do to be helpful to you guys as you're planning a strong year.
First, so much has changed about the journalism industry, or just about that transition from working at a student media organization to going to being a professional reporter. But although things have changed, and although that field looks so different, I know a lot of the feelings and just that general emotional experience is so much the same. And we have so many seniors or upperclassmen here. And I just want to ask you and go all the way back to when you graduated and when you started at the Charlotte Observer. Talk to us sort of about how that opportunity came about, and what were the kind of the feelings there when you were first starting off?
Great question. If I can remember. Oh my gosh. Yeah, so I think when I was an undergraduate, I had a lot of newspaper internships. I interned at the what's now the Tampa Bay Times. I interned at the Washington Post. I interned at a small paper in North Carolina before that. But I also had been in touch with the Charlotte Observer recruiters pretty much every year. They always came to campus and did interviews. So I had been in touch with them, and had the opportunity to be hired pretty much right out of school, which was not as common then as it is now. But we were in the Observer at that time was what was called a regional paper. It had a lot of bureaus, more than, gosh, I think 60 reporters who worked outside of the main newsroom and bureaus at that time. Now there's not even 30 reporters at the Charlotte Observer today at all. And there were, the newsroom itself was much larger then. I think a few things that really stand out to me when I think about my first job are how much free time I actually had. From coming from the student media world where I'd been editor of the Daily Tar Heel. I went to class all day. I worked until midnight every night, putting the paper out. And then I would go home and do my homework. Actually, just having a full-time job was so freeing. I felt like I had so much spare time, time to have hobbies and read and do all and really work really hard. But it wasn't like being in college and being in student media. So that's one thing I think, just kind of maybe that's a good thing to think about is there's not gonna, like, what y'all are doing now is really hard and very rewarding. But also, like, especially when you're first out of college, you don't have, you may not have as many like home responsibilities. And it's really an exciting time to be kind of out in the world, making money, being able to explore. I think that's a really exciting time for me to think back and remember.
Obviously, you were working at the Observer for a decade, and then you decided to go back and you decided to go into education where you've been working for some time now. Mm-hmm. Talk to us about that decision. I feel like a lot of us in our heads, we don't really see ourselves coming back into academics at all or working in that setting. I would love to ask you about what went into that decision and mm-hmm. what that's like.
Yeah. So I think after about 10 years as a reporter, I was, trying to think a lot about what I wanted to do next. And the job at the Daily Tar Heel came open, and it just, I remember the former general manager at the time sent around the job description to a handful of former editors just to get feedback on the job description and say, what do y'all think about this? We'd never had a news advisor before. And I read the job description and I was like, well, I feel like this was written for me, right? I had that experience feeling like that job was written for me. And so I decided to apply for it. It was, when I think back to the formative experiences I had in student media as an undergraduate student and the way that it had basically given me my professional career, I just wanted to have the opportunity to help other students have that same experience. And then I was able to do that for 13 years, working at the Daily Tar Heel as advisor and then as general manager. It was really pretty much a dream come true in a lot of ways.
I feel like we have such a strong sense of culture around student papers. I feel like student journalists have who we are and what it feels like to be in a student paper. I can only imagine what it's like to take on a whole new role and look at that community and look at that culture from an entirely new perspective, whether it's as the advisor or as the general manager. Tell us about that. Tell us what it was like when you were working there as a student, and then talk about what it's like coming back and what changed or did it feel the same?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think the main things that changed between like 1998 and 2008 were was about technology, right? Like technology changed a ton. But in terms of like the news gathering process and what how hard students were working and kind of the passion that they had for covering the campus, like that really didn't change much at all in that 10 years that I was gone. I would say that right around the time I arrived at the Daily Tar Heel in 2008, that was, the beginning of the Great Recession. And so like in a real dramatic period of change for the news industry. And I would say, so probably things changed on our campus and inside our newspaper way more, like maybe that first 5 or 6 years after I got there as advisor, that was some of the most dramatic change that the paper had seen in probably 30 or 40 years before that, because of both the kind of extreme pace of technological change, the introduction of smartphones on campus, the rise of social media, and then the Great Recession, right? All those things really combined to make a huge change in the way our newspaper worked, the way it was funded, and the way students on campus wanted to receive their news.
I would love to ask you about that, about how students receive their news. And we feel like we're working at this rapid pace. It's so different than what we were doing before, and we're adapting. It seems like the world of journalism is constantly in that place of adapting, but it's only speeding up and it's accelerating. And I feel like there is this sense that, is there a point to which I can't adapt quick enough anymore? Or is it worth adapting every single time? And I feel like there's always hesitance and there's always resistance. Can you talk to us a little bit about that, and about about audience, and obviously understanding information and what they need, but following them in different mediums, or following the mediums only for it to change on you? Where is it worth investing? When is it worth investing? I feel like those are the questions that we're always grappling with, like even from year to year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, if you've been in journalism over the last 15 years, you've seen just a tremendous cycle of innovation and change, but also a lot of things that maybe have turned out not to be so great for journalism in the industry. I think when I think back to like those early years at the DTH, right, like that was that was the rise of social media, when everyone thought social media was like an unalloyed force for good and connection, and that information just wanted to be free, and that we would figure out how to make money later, right? Like that all didn't really turn out so great, I guess. But I don't know what other way there was to go through it but to live through it, right? And to experiment and work through it. And I think, but when I think about like, how do you prioritize? How do you think about what to embrace, what to stick with, when to embrace change? I really try to think about mission, values, and impact, right? What's the mission of your organization? What are the values that you kind of hold to more than, no matter what? And then what's the impact that you want to have on your readers, on your community, on the students who work there? And then kind of with those things foremost in mind, right, then that's when you think about, prioritization within things that are going to let you hold to that mission and values and help you have the greatest impact. But that's what you have to kind of think about, like what stays constant throughout a lot of change. Technology is a tool, right, a lot of times. And so if a tool is going to help you have a greater impact, if it's going to help you stay true to those values and mission, then that's definitely a thing to try. If it's not, then maybe that's the thing to not prioritize at that time. I always like to think about, there's a tool called the ease impact matrix. And that's basically just like a big, a big matrix where, you have how hard something is going to be on one end, how easy it's going to be on the other end. And then you have on the other axis, you have high impact, low impact when it comes to like achieving your ultimate mission and vision. And so you really want to think about doing the things and embracing the tools and trying the change that's going to have high impact and be something that's really easy to do, and really avoid the things that are low impact and hard to do. That's a real easy kind of framework for prioritization and helping you think about like what to do and what not to do. If that makes any sense, I should find a picture of it and share it in the chat. But I think thinking about impact and ability to get something accomplished is a really great way to think about how to prioritize.
You know, these talks, you talked about monetizing already and briefly in that. And at first, those were incredible lessons there, you know, that you briefly touched on. And I was taking notes on those. Those are fantastic about mission, value, and impact. And I deeply think that, yeah, I think if the soul of your paper is really strong and the culture of what you're trying to do is there, it's really hard to make irreversible mistakes or anything that would really harm you in the long run or how your image is. So no, those were incredible lessons. We talk so much about the news side, or at least the editorial side in these talks typically. And we have a lot of business people here, and I'm the business manager of the Daily Collegian. So I really I have no choice but to make sure this is a rewarding experience for our business people here too. I would love to ask you about what the commercial side of the operation at the Daily Tar Heel is like. What does that operation even look like in the most basic sense, and how many students are working there, and how much professional staff is sort of helping them out? And really, what have you seen as things have changed on the editorial side, and as you've embraced different things, what has changed on the business side, and maybe how has that relationship looked?
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing that was a really big part of the Daily Tar Heel kind of digging out of the financial hole it was in back in 2017, 2018 was really trying to knock down a lot of the idea that there are sides, right? That there's a business side and a news side, and that they're in a silo, you know, and instead it's really important to try to think about what is the role that each team might play in achieving sustainability or in achieving the impact that we want to have. So that's one thing to think about, right? But I think the way we're structured, again, it's a 501c3 nonprofit. We get no student fees or no funds of any kind from the university, and we have an off-campus space that we pay rent on. So there's, you know, we get very, very little, absolutely no support from the university. This full-time staff was, you know, a general manager, and then someone who is in charge of advertising and our 1893 brand studio, which is a student marketing department. A part-time contract bookkeeper also on the business side, kind of doing the books, paying and that sort of thing. We have a student business manager, as well as a student ad director, and a student 1893 brand studio director, and then a student staffs underneath each of those directors. So the 1893 brand studio, like I said, is a team of about 25 students who create content, who do marketing, who do, you know, whatever clients might hire us to do. That's not just, you know, maybe it's making videos or building websites. It's kind of a suite of products. The advertising students are selling ads, both digital, print, social, you know, that sort of thing. I would say the business side probably has maybe 35 to 40 students who are working either on the ad staff or the brand studio, or on the team of work study students who do a lot of the kind of the customer service work. Major revenue streams for the Daily Tar Heel are print advertising, digital advertising, which includes newsletter advertising, which is a big growth area. Also includes social sponsored posts, which is also has been an area of growth over the last few years, especially sponsored Instagram posts and stories. It includes kind of out of home advertising, like posters on newspaper boxes, inserts, things like that. Also revenue stream around the 1893 brand studio, creative and marketing services. There's a store.dailytarhill.com, which is sports memorabilia and other things, merchant, shirts, t-shirts, that sort of thing. Which is like a kind of a feast or famine type of situation. But when there's like a big sports event or a big viral moment, then that store exists to sell lots and lots of product. Then the last revenue stream, which was very new to us, which is fundraising through individual donors, many of whom are alumni of both the university and the Daily Tar Heel, but also includes people who are just, who are faculty on campus, who are staff, who are longtime residents of the community, parents of current students, alumni of the university generally, maybe who didn't work at the Daily Tar Heel, and then, sometimes sports fans. That's quite a few different target audiences for our fundraising. That became, when I left the DTH in 2021, we had those were basically like 4 to 5 main revenue streams that were pretty, not one was overly dominant, which was a really positive thing for us, coming from a situation where as recently as 2018, 90% of our revenue is coming from print advertising, and that number was shrinking every year. So it was really good to get to a point where we had multiple revenue streams where none of them was overly dominant. Did that answer your question?
Absolutely. Oh man, that was really, really thorough look at what you guys are doing. And I'm sure people in our business division and our editorials heard things that were very familiar and heard some brand new things that I think, oh yeah, we'd love to take a look at it, just in terms of staff roles. And obviously what you're doing with revenue, or what the Daily Tar Heel is doing with revenue now, is so impressive. And, obviously there's such a sense of admiration for every other student organization that's doing a really great job. And the Daily Tar Heel is certainly one of them. And a second part of that, my question is definitely to talk about, you talked about breaking down that wall. And I definitely think that that's been such a goal of the leadership right now. And there's just that willingness to break down any sense that we are 2 divisions and instead see ourselves as one Daily Collegian is really something we're striving for in really basic sense, like doing meetings together, all staff meetings, but then also it could look really, really practical. So talk to me a little bit about what that process was like in terms of just removing any sense of separation, or any sense of separation. And then also practically, what does that relationship look like? Because ultimately revenue is a goal for the entire paper. It is not just salespeople's job. And then also a great editorial product is all of our job. Putting out a great product is every single staff member's purpose and mission. So what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, so once again, I think it goes back to that question of mission, values, and impact, right? That what is the overall North Star of your organization that you're trying to get to? And then really making sure that everyone, all your leaders of your different teams, understand what role it is that they play in achieving that. Right. Like, for example, like when I think we were in maybe the worst of our financial problems, like folks in the newsroom would sometimes feel like personally responsible for raising money, for example. And I would say, you know what, it's not your job to raise money. That's my job. But it is your job to, to make the very best product that you can. That kind of aligns with, the messaging that we're, that's part of the messaging we're doing for fundraising. Or if we're, launching a new product that's ad supported, right? The job of the newsroom is to make sure that product is extremely high quality. And the newsroom's job is to do a lot of work around audience, right? And making sure that, that the audiences are served. On the other hand, I guess, right? Like advertising team, right? Like they need to understand that their role is to sell ads, right? Their role is to kind of be an ambassador of that news, of the paper's mission and vision to the business community. The folks at the 1893 brand studio understand that their job is to help diversify revenue and make our organization more sustainable, while also just delivering a really top-notch product to the client and the community. So just really kind of an understanding of how all of those pieces fit together and how everyone has a job to do. And those jobs don't always overlap, but they all should be really understood. Like everybody needs to understand what everybody else is doing, why they're doing it, and then make sure that they have the space and the support to get it all done. One thing we did start doing is we created what we would call a student leadership team, that was the editor-in-chief and the managing editor, plus the advertising director, the brand studio director, the business manager, the student production manager. And we would just have a weekly meeting once a week where we looked at the week ahead. We all reported out what our priorities were for that week, what problems we were struggling with, did some leadership development training, and just to make sure that everybody had a really good understanding of who everyone was, what their teams were accomplishing, what they were good at. We always started that meeting with we would call it with shout outs. We called it like an ICU, and everybody had to go around and talk about someone on their team who had done something really extraordinary the week before that wasn't visible, that wasn't necessarily visible to everyone. And so that was like one way of like sharing with across teams, like someone who was doing really great work. So those are just some little things, right? And then we would post that list out in the office so that everyone could see, right, who was getting shouted out that week. So it's just, some of it's little stuff and some of it's big stuff, but that I think really having everyone bought into the same like idea of like what's the path we're trying to be on and how do we get there.
Oh, I've loved so much the ICU portion of your meetings, but also leadership development. I think the one thing that we lack is so much professional experience, and it becomes a very professional environment, and it's a very professional workload and a very professional level of stress at times. And so I love the idea of developing those skills in a really concrete way, but then also celebrating people is so important, and celebrating small wins and big ones. But that's a brilliant example of how to keep everyone's eyes up and see who's winning when no one else is. I'd love to go into, and this is a topic that I know you really want to touch on, and I think it's so pertinent for us. It's visible to anyone that our readership demographics are focused towards an older audience, that ultimately our mission is to serve a Penn State community, specifically our students, and they aren't our highest readership right now, and that doesn't necessarily match up. And so we're trying to solve these things, and everyone on this Zoom has a role in trying to better that situation and solve that problem. And so a key part of that is knowing your audience, and that's something that you wanted to talk about. So I'll let you go into that, because you're certainly an expert in this.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm an expert, but I think it's something I care a whole lot about. I think one of the things that happened in student media over the last 10 to 15 years was like this kind of weird false binary between print and digital, right? Where people were like, oh, print is, print is the most important. No, digital is the most important, blah, 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 blah. And lots of fighting and lots of like debate about this and like time wasted. And meanwhile, what's most important is the audience. If they're on digital, that's great. If they're in print, that's great. But really, what matters is the audience and getting to them. And in the move to digital, the assumption was, well, our audiences are younger people like to use phones and computers, and so we just need to be digital. But what happened with that a lot of times is that students weren't seeking us out online or on their phones, because the attention there wasn't enough work done on like getting that information to them specifically. So we would have situations where, like maybe in the olden days, someone would pick up a print paper and they take it to class because they couldn't be on the internet in class, and they needed to do the crossword puzzle to distract them from a boring lecture. But maybe they would read, I don't know, 5 or 6 stories, like out of that daily paper. And the analog now is like, if, sometimes I think like if I could get someone to come back and read 3 whole stories on the Daily Tar Heels website in a month, like that's really good. Right. You don't see a lot of people reading 5 or 6 stories a day. And so that's a huge problem that we haven't spent a lot of time on over the years, is like, how do we create loyalty, and how do we get the attention of the folks that we say are our core readership? And so there's a kind of a few things that I think need to be done around that. One is some, you might want to, you call it market research, audience research, focus groups, whatever you want to call it, do something along, really ask your audience, what do they want? What are their information needs as they are going through life at Penn State? Where are there gaps that could be filled by your work? We did back in 2018, we did this big project where we had sit down interviews, qualitative interviews with about 40 students who represented the student body. Although we said nobody could be a journalism major, because we felt like we understood what was going on with the journalism majors. But we did these long qualitative interviews, and then we kind of used some design thinking to find commonalities in what people were telling us. And one of the, some of the big takeaways that we got from that was that a lot of, that not very many students had a local news habit, right? They weren't going to the Daily Tar Heel or any other local news source very often, but that they did express a lot of information needs, right? They needed to know things like, when events were happening on campus. They needed to know things like, how do I find my people when I get to college, right? Like, how do I find out about the activities? And they felt very, they had information needs, but they didn't see the Daily Tar Heel as something that could fill those needs. And, other things that kind of came out of that interview process were about, we discovered that a lot of students reported that when they were first years, they were really unhappy and they were really lost. They didn't have any friends, and they were like, college is supposed to be the best 4 years of my life. When is that going to start? And but really, as their years went on, they found their people, they got involved in the activity, whether it's, club rugby or a church, a faith group, or student media, or whatever it was. And so like that would happen, and then they would find friends and they would get more involved in their major, and then they would come to love their UNC experience. And so we ended up designing an entire year's worth of coverage around the first year experience, right? We actually said, we're here because your first year is hard, and we're here to help. And it was just a series of products and stories about making the first, kind of demystifying the first year experience and talking about it. That was something else that they told us, is that in addition to feeling lost and confused and unhappy, they felt like no one was talking about it because you weren't supposed to admit it out loud, right? So that's just an example of really kind of doing some deep research about what your audience wants, and then trying to think about how do you meet those needs. And a lot of that work that we did, this was again like back in 2018. So a lot of it was using Facebook groups, Facebook message groups, other, to really do a lot of that deep engagement, and like helping people. We actually created a Facebook group for first years where we would have reporters on, kind of live chatting in the Facebook group during registration for classes for incoming first years. And we had so many first years come on and ask them questions about like, how do I register for class? What am I, this happened, what am I going to do? And it was just kind of this interesting, thing, was it like big J journalism? Maybe not, but it really was a way to kind of build a relationship and a loyalty with, a group of students that was coming in, and a way to also really think about, meeting their information needs, right? So that's an example of a few things that we did. So that's, just kind of try to figure out what the needs are, and then try to meet them. And then on the other side, we tried to really do a lot of work, around defining, who our target audiences were digitally, right? Like sometimes it's really hard to figure out, the demographics of your online audiences, but when you can, can define groups as like people who are on campus, people who are 18 to 24, and really kind of tracking. We did some custom analytics tracking to see, not just what are the total number of stories or clicks that we might be getting in a day or a month, but within those subgroups, what's going on? What are the most popular stories amongst 18 to 24-year-olds? And how are they different from the most popular stories, that older folks were clicking on? Or what were the most popular stories among people who visited 3 times in a month? And you can use that kind of data to really think pretty deeply about, okay, so people who are coming to my site 3 times a month and are in my age group, they're reading these stories. So what is it about those stories? What is it about that content? How can we make more of that? Right? Just to really kind of think about, not just your total analytics, but, the people you really want to make more of, who are in the audiences you've defined, I think is a really important thing to think about. I am curious just to hear from y'all, how are y'all thinking about your target audiences, and what are you thinking in terms of how to serve them with news and information?
I actually had a follow-up question, and I can take that after.
Yeah.
So when it comes to kind of meeting that information need, and nice to talk to you again, by the way, sorry.
Absolutely.
When it comes to kind of meeting that information need, especially in a social and online setting, a lot of times nowadays, college papers are competing directly with university accounts that are, just 10 times the following. It's just ease of access for students who may have followed them when they came to visit and stuff like that. So when you're at the Tar Heel and you're trying to figure out ways to differentiate yourself and get eyeballs on the stories and just the brand of the Tar Heel, what are some of the main things you're thinking about? How are you separating yourself from a university tweet that, UNC has 500,000 followers, you guys have 10?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a really great question. I think honestly, authenticity and, kind of independence really shines through. I'll give you an example. We started, this is not a student example, but we started a newsletter for UNC parents, because we heard from parents of UNC students that they felt like all the information they were getting from the university was like too polished and shiny happy and not the real deal, right? And so, we were able to say, okay, well, we're gonna create a product that's just for them, and that is, kind of aiming at giving a, kind of a, not negative, but just an authentic, real view of what's going on campus. And that's, I think that holds true for students as well as parents, right? Like, I think the university in general has a PR machine that is extremely savvy, but also like, it's fake. So I think that the authenticity and the realness is like what a student newspaper has to offer.
Another follow-up to that, I don't know, this could just be me and how I see other Penn State students and just alumni, but I feel like Penn State is a weird example, and in that, like, it can do no wrong outside of like what happened 10 years ago. Like, I don't think, I'm wondering how to kind of balance the fact that maybe students don't really care so much about the real deal and they just want the basic stuff. So, like, when it comes to a university like Penn State, where you have 7 to 8 generations going back, you're sending all your kids here. What should we be thinking about to really just
Hmm.
get to them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think UNC is not that different in the sense that there's a lot of Carolina exceptionalists out in the world, but we also have had a lot of incidents on our campus beyond, maybe, like over kind of in the recent past that have, I guess, created more distrust probably between students and the administration. So that's maybe slightly different. But again, I think it comes down to just being extremely useful, extremely authentic, and, and kind of just having your finger on the pulse, right? I think about the front page that this year's team made in response to the shooting. That wasn't anything that any official university channel was going to be able to create, right? And it wasn't something, but it was extremely authentic. It was extremely real. And it struck a nerve, like both, of course, national around the globe, but very much on our campus. And so I think that's where I just can't state enough. I think you have to really figure out what your voice is. And being independent is a really an important thing, and something to make sure that you're telling your audience a lot, is that you guys are independent and that you are a voice for them, and that you're not a voice for the university, for like the university administration.
And then kind of circling back to your question and how we're thinking about reaching specific demographics and stuff like that. This is something we've all kind of know. The younger audiences are just much harder to reach nowadays. And in that, their attention is all over the place, and you only have so much that you can do right away. So we've been talking about a lot about that this year. And we're just trying to find them in all the places that they're at between social media. We're working on new newsletters to kind of maintain that older demographic that we have such a strong grip on, and then really kind of dial in on coverage that we know we're already good at, that can kind of pay the bills a little bit more, and then really branch out into smaller niche things as that does provide that informational need. We were talking to somebody, Luke, I forget what his name was. He said you got to cover the Kardashians so you can cover City Hall. And that's kind of, we know our sports coverage is always going to reach a lot of people. Penn State sports are just like, the world to so many people, but we know that we really have to hone in. And we know that a lot of our news, like you were saying, being useful, we see a lot more success on useful posts and useful articles that students actually care about, between just a silly article about like how many gen eds you need, or like the best gen eds. Like, we have a gen ed article from 5 years ago that still shows up in the top 10 once a year.
Yeah.
So, we really think useful was something that, between Olivia, Sophia, and myself, we talked about making sure that all the content, we don't put anything out that's not going to be useful to people.
Good. I think that makes a lot of sense. And that's talk about the power of SEO, right? That story about the gen eds. I think about that a lot when I think about how people search and find information in the digital age, and in the world we're in right now, and trying to think about like, what's the shelf life for the stories we write. And I think it's really important to think about people don't always want to access your news when you make it. They want to access your news when they need it. And so that's something to really kind of think about in terms of like how you write stories that might have a long tail, like this gen ed story, how you think about headlines, how you think about SEO, so that there is, you know, that you're understanding that there is kind of a long tail to it, and that there's an evergreen kind of nature to some of the stories that you might be writing, and think about how to make that, make it feel like someone's not coming across a 5-year-old story, right? But that they're coming across something really useful to them at that time. A good example about that would be, in the fall of 2020, during the election, we had some special election analytics. And so we were able to monitor what was going on. And we figured out that during the month before the election, we just got massive amounts of continual traffic on the voter guide stories that really were uncovered by other media. And it was definitely just people going into early vote. They were Googling North Carolina Council of State Elections, right? Our story was popping up, and it was helping them vote. And so it's just a really great way to kind of think about, if you're going to do a voter guide story, for example, if you're going to do something like that, like making sure that the SEO is such that, you know, people are going to find it when they need it. But I think that's really interesting. And I do think it's also really helpful when you're story planning, to think about who's the audience. How do we make sure that we're writing it for them, and not for the sources, not for some, you know, imaginary reader from 25 years ago when the inverted pyramid was created, or way more than 25 years ago, I guess. But just, you know, thinking about like what are the people that we're trying to reach? How are they going to need this story? What's the information that they're going to want to get out of it? And really put them at the center of how you write it.
Sorry, that's actually such a great point, and something I think, you know, you just mentioned the inverted pyramid and that kind of structure of article writing, and it's so weird in how obviously like all journalists need to learn that and understand what that is, but you find most times that they're oftentimes not as successful. And, you know, in your experience between news advising and just reporting in general, how can you break that form and still be the strongest journalist that you know, you're still hitting all the bases, obviously, but how do you separate yourself from that mold?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, again, like really putting the audience at the heart of what you're trying to do. You know, like sometimes I think a lot about like, what's the atomic unit of journalism? And I don't really think it's the article anymore, or it shouldn't be. That should, you know, like that shouldn't be the atomic unit. Sometimes I think that it should be a question and its answer. Right, like that we're thinking about units of information, not necessarily that might be accessed at any time through search, and not just, you know, the article as it was written today for tomorrow's print newspaper. And so that, I think, thinking about like, again, like what is someone going to want to know from this information? What is their, you know, how much time are they likely to have to consume it? And how do we get it to them really quickly? I mean, that, to me, that's important. Like, I think, you know, like we can kind of make fun of smart brevity TM, but it's actually, you know, like that's a writing in bullet points is not a terrible thing if the goal is to get information across really quickly to someone who needs it really quickly. You know, and then I think you can save those, you know, kind of long, beautifully written pieces for the special stories that need that touch. You know, I mean, I remember 20 years ago, an editor said to me, you know, 20% of 80% of the stories in our newspaper are too long, and 20% of them are too short. And like the magic is trying to figure out how to cut down the ones that are too long to what they need to be, and then decide which ones are the ones that need to be longer and that deserve the space and the beautiful writing and the storytelling, because we still need that. That's, you know, part of our human need for connection and story. But not every story, you know, but instead of having like kind of short, easy chunks of story and then long, beautiful pieces, we just have everything's 14 inches long. So we need to think about that, like where you know, what does the story need and what does the reader need out of it?
Awesome. Thank you so much.
I really want to open this up. We have kind of limited time. I know that there's so many business people on this call right now, and obviously so many people from our editorial side. Yeah, if you have any questions at all, please put them in the chat or just turn on your mic and start asking. Yeah, so if anyone has a question, you know, you can raise your hand or do whatever. But in the meantime, just as sort of a buffer to that and to anyone who wants to ask a question, Erica, you've seen so many iterations of the Daily Tar Heel, so many different student leaders coming through the doors, and obviously seen it change so much. I think in general, we'd love to have that perspective. You know, we only have a year in this role, and we'd love to know, you know, what are the pitfalls that you see in newsrooms? You know, what can people get stuck on, or leadership get stuck on, or even your staff get stuck on that'll hold them back from maybe reaching the potential that maybe other years do reach?
Neat question. I love that. Gosh, I mean, I think the number one pitfall that you can fall into is thinking that the newspaper is there for you. And that it's there to serve your professional goals. That it's there as something you deserve because you put in the time as a first year student and now you're the leader, and that you need to have exactly what the person before you had. I think that it's really easy to kind of experience student media that way. And when you do that, you're missing the opportunity to serve an audience and to kind of add to the mission and the value and the impact that this organization can have collectively. I think that when you do put the reader first, and when you put the serving the community first, then you do get the experience, you do get the jobs, you do get the professional development, you do get all the things that you think you want to have. Right, like I think an example along those lines is, you know, back when we were having some of our worst financial troubles, you know, and we would have to do things like cut the sports travel budget, or cut the, you know, the amount of pages. You know, like a lot of times the folks in the newsroom took that as a punishment, or like this idea that they weren't doing, they were doing something wrong and they were being punished for it. And when it was really just the reality of the economics, right? And it wasn't a punishment at all. It was just what had to happen. And so that it kind of fed into kind of a real toxic relationship between the different stakeholders at the paper. So I would say, you know, that is a pitfall. I think another one would be, you know, caring too much about who has a good idea. Right, like in my opinion, the best leaders don't care whose idea it was, they go with it. Right, the best leaders are able to see potential in other people and other people's ideas and make them happen for them. Whereas I think more insecure leaders are worried about credit, or are worried about, well, I'm the editor and I have to make this decision. I think that, so I think that that's a pitfall I've seen a lot over the years, is people who are really afraid of that. I think a pitfall is, you know, kind of using, you know, like letting your imposter syndrome or whatever it is, kind of letting you self-sabotage, and right, not be the best you can be. I think a lot of times people are afraid of really trying and seeing how great they can be. And so they do things like not get enough sleep, or not do their homework and get stuck in a jam, or they're always late, or whatever it is, right? And a lot of it's just kind of self-sabotaging behavior that keeps you from being your best. So I think those are a few things. I mean, I think, another one is trying to put you know, like trying to separate yourself from the regime that came before you, and you know, kind of undoing progress for, you know, just because, or because of some sort of personality conflict that you might have had with folks from the year before. You know, I think that it's really important to see again, like having that common vision and idea of where you want to go is understanding that you have to build this over many years. And while every leader is going to put their own stamp on it, it needs to be part of a larger goal. I used to, I've seen so many editors come in and just, undo everything the editor before them did. And that was probably not that big of a deal when like national advertising was pouring in at hundreds of thousands of dollars a year and everything was fine, but that's just not really feasible these days. So those are a few things. I don't know. Those are some things I saw a lot. I don't know if any of that strikes any nerves.
No, of course. And I think so many of those, and I feel like you've seen it all. Once you've spent 4 years at a paper, I feel like you've seen at least a few of those things. And no, I think that's really useful and practical wisdom. We're kind of getting on to that time, and we don't want to take up too much more of your night. I would love to end, in the best way possible. Is what would be your advice to young college students who are working in a student media organization? What's your advice to us? And yeah, just, and I'll let you take that wherever you please.
Gosh. Okay. I think one thing I always used to say a lot, which is that it takes a heck of a lot of work to make a really mediocre paper. So you might as well work just a little bit harder and make it great. That's just the way it is, right? No matter, to do the bare minimum, you have to really work hard and put in a lot of hours, and it's the main thing you do. And so just really be strategic about how you spend that time and do the little things to make the product and the paper and the experience and the leadership development and all those intangible things, make them great. Because it doesn't take that much more work than kind of doing the bare minimum. And I would just challenge y'all to be great. You've got it in you. Student media has so much power. We're in I think a moment right now where people are understanding like how important the role of student media is. Colleges are changing. We're in a moment of massive transition on America's campuses, and y'all have like the front row seat for covering it, for chronicling it, for being the voice of your generation. And no one else is doing it. No professional media is not doing it. And when they are doing it, they're doing it really badly a lot of the times. And so I would just really challenge y'all to meet that moment that we're in and be awesome.
Oh man, Erica, just on behalf of everyone, thank you all so much. Thank you to the AIG for inviting Erica and putting this all together. We're really thankful for your work, Jason and Nicole. Thank you so much for all this wisdom. I've taken tons and tons of notes. I'm sure everyone else on the call has been doing the same, and we'll be thinking about this for a long time. So yeah, thank you so much.
All right. Well, I hope you all have a great night.
Thank you,
Thank
Erica.
you so much.
Erica.